There comes a moment when your strength finally runs out. You've tried everything, fought the battles in silence, smiled through exhaustion, prayed the same prayer for months until the words lost their shape. You've carried the weight of expectation and disappointment so long that even your faith feels tired. And in that quiet breaking point, when you whisper, "God, I can't do this anymore," something begins to shift in the unseen. Because heaven doesn't move at the height of your striving. It moves in the silence of your surrender. It's the paradox no one tells you about. The moment you stop trying to control everything is the moment God begins to move everything. He doesn't step in when you're at your strongest. He steps in when you finally stop pretending to be. That's when grace enters, like breath after drowning, like light touching the deepest part of your night. But here's the mystery. Surrender isn't giving up. It's the moment when your plans collapse just enough for His to fit perfectly into place. And if you're in that place right now, the breaking, the waiting, the in-between, don't mistake it for abandonment. God's silence is not distance, it's alignment. The soil must split before new roots can take hold. The seed doesn't cry when buried, it's preparing to rise. Because what happens after true surrender isn't weakness, it's resurrection. And when God moves, it's never slow, it's sudden, undeniable, and holy. There is a silence that only arrives after the storm. It's not peaceful at first, it's haunting. The kind that hums with everything left unsaid, where even your heartbeat feels too loud. You sit there, surrounded by the quiet wreckage of plans that didn't work out, people who didn't stay, prayers that didn't seem to move anything. You've tried so hard to make sense of it all, to stay strong, to keep believing that the next door will open if you just push a little harder. But now you're too tired to push, too tired to fix, too tired to pretend that you're okay. And it's in that exhaustion that heaven leans closer, because this is the place God waits for, where all the noise of your effort fades just enough for you to hear the whisper that's been there all along. Be still. You see, the world teaches you to fight for control, to plan, to predict, to prevent pain. But God teaches through surrender, and His lessons never begin until yours end. Surrender isn't weakness. It's holy admission. It's the quiet act of unclenching your fists after years of holding on too tightly. It's when you finally stop trying to convince God how to move, and instead you let Him decide where the pieces fall. You can feel it deep down, can't you? That subtle tug in your chest, the one that says, "You've done all you can, now watch me." It's not the voice of defeat, it's because the truth is, you were never meant to carry what only heaven can hold. In the Bible, every moment of divine intervention came after surrender. Abraham laid Isaac on the altar before God provided the ram. Moses stretched out empty hands before the sea split in two. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, whispered, "Not my will, but yours be done," before heaven opened and redemption began. Surrender doesn't delay God's plan, it activates it. But surrender feels terrifying at first, because you don't know what comes after. You fear that if you stop fighting, everything will fall apart. You fear that letting go means losing control completely. What you don't realize is that the ground beneath you isn't crumbling, it's clearing. God cannot rebuild on foundations still cluttered with fear. You close your eyes. You remember all the times you begged God for clarity, not realizing that his silence was not punishment, it was pruning. He was stripping away everything false, every illusion of control, until all that remained was you and him. Because when everything else is gone, that's where true faith is born. You whisper again, softer this time, not out of desperation, but surrender. God, I trust you even if I don't understand. And something happens. The air shifts. The weight doesn't disappear, but it changes. It's no longer pressing down, it's being lifted. Slowly, invisibly, yet undeniably. You can feel God moving not outside of you, but within you. He's rearranging the unseen, working through the stillness. Heaven moves differently than earth. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. God doesn't need noise to perform miracles. He needs space. And surrender creates that space. This is what no one tells you about surrender. It's holy realignment. It's the calm before the revelation, not after. It's the quiet reshaping of your heart so that when the miracle finally comes, it has somewhere to land. You look around your life and realize how much of your pain was not from waiting, but from resisting. The walls you built to protect yourself became the very barriers keeping God out. The plans you clung to so tightly were too small for the life He's trying to give you. You've been praying for open doors, but sometimes God closes them not to punish you but to redirect you toward something greater. The door that slammed in your face was never meant to humiliate you, it was meant to protect you from walking into a counterfeit blessing. And yet, surrender doesn't come easily. It's learned through heartbreak, through confusion, through those nights when you whisper prayers that feel unanswered. But it's in those very moments that heaven is closest, because surrender is the sound of your spirit yielding, the echo of trust louder than fear. You start to breathe differently now. You realize that maybe peace isn't found in getting what you want, but in trusting God's timing for what you need. Somewhere deep inside, a small light flickers, faith, fragile but alive. It's not the loud, confident faith that demands results. It's the quiet faith that whispers, even if nothing changes right now, I believe He's still working. That's when God begins to move, not in dramatic thunder or fire, but in small alignments, an unexpected message, a sudden peace, a divine delay that begins to make sense. You start to see that what felt like silence was actually strategy, that the waiting was not wasted, was warfare. God was fighting battles for you that you didn't even know existed. And as you surrender, you realize something profound. You don't need to know how it will work out. You just need to trust who is working it out. The hardest part of surrender is that it feels like nothing's happening right before everything happens. And when it does, it won't come slowly. It will come all at once. The tears you cried will turn into clarity. The confusion will turn into confirmation. The broken road will reveal itself as the only one that led you home. Because God never forgot you. He was just waiting for you to let go so He could finally take over. And this is only the beginning. Surrender rarely feels holy at first. It feels like loss, like standing in the ruins of what you once called God's promise, and wondering if you misunderstood Him all along. You stare at what's left, the unanswered prayers, the relationships that faded without explanation, the dreams that used to burn so brightly and now sit quietly in the corner of your heart. You tell yourself, maybe I just didn't have enough faith. But deep down, there's a whisper that contradicts your desperate, quiet reminder. you didn't fail. You finally stopped fighting against grace. That's the part no one teaches you. Grace doesn't always enter gently. Sometimes it interrupts, it dismantles, it rearranges the furniture of your soul until nothing fits where it used to. Because grace isn't just the comfort of God, it's the construction site where your spirit learns to breathe again. The moment you surrender, heaven begins its silent work. You might not see it, but God is already moving in places you can't reach. The person who left, they were part of a lesson, not your destination. The door that closed, it was never aligned with your purpose. The waiting season that feels endless, it's not punishment, it's preservation. God will never answer a prayer in a way that destroys your faith. So if He's delaying something, it's because He's developing you. And that process, though invisible, is where the greatest miracles are born. You begin to notice it slowly, not through thunderclaps, but through details. The email that comes at the right time, the verse that speaks directly to your confusion, the peace that suddenly appears in a place where panic used to live. You start to see that surrender doesn't mean stopping, it means shifting. It's no longer your strength carrying the weight. It's His, but the world doesn't applaud surrender. It teaches you to grind, to build, to never stop pushing. The problem is, you can't outbuild what God is trying to break down. He doesn't need your perfection, He needs your permission. Because heaven moves at the speed of humility. Think of the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years, she tried everything the world offered, only to find herself worse. But in one moment of surrender, reaching through the crowd just to touch the hem of His garment, everything shifted. The healing didn't come from striving. It came from touching grace. That's what surrender feels like. It's the reaching that doesn't make sense. It's the decision to trust even when the evidence tells you not to. It's saying, God, I don't know where this leads, but I know who's leading. And yet, surrender requires a kind of death of your plan, your timing, your need to understand. It's the moment when you stop asking when and start whispering whatever. It's terrifying because it costs everything, but it's sacred because it reveals everything. You walk outside one night, the air still and cool, and look at the stars. You realize how small you are and how infinite He is, and for the first time, that truth doesn't make you afraid. It comforts you, because if the same God who hung the stars knows your name, then maybe the delay isn't denial, it's divine choreography. Surrender doesn't erase your pain, but it transforms it. Pain stops being proof that God is absent and becomes proof that He's close enough to prune you. Every unanswered prayer becomes a seed buried deep, waiting for resurrection. And when it blooms, you'll understand why He took so long. You start to live differently now. You no longer chase peace, you protect it. You don't force doors open, you knock. And if they stay closed, you thank God for walls that keep you safe. You stop demanding signs because now you've learned to recognize His silence as one. In surrender, you discover something that striving never gave you: rest. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, but on certainty. The certainty that even when you can't trace His hand, you can trust His heart. And just as you begin to find peace in the waiting, something unexpected happens. A small door opens, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, as if heaven itself is whispering, "Now you're ready." The timing feels too perfect to be coincidence. You realize that God was never withholding the blessing. He was waiting for your heart to stop competing with it. Because surrender doesn't earn God's favor, it makes room for it. You take a deep breath, and for the first time in years, you feel light, not because the situation has changed, but because you have. This is where the miracle begins to unfold. Not in the noise of trying, but in the quiet of trusting. And as you fall asleep that night, you sense something has shifted. The silence that once felt empty now feels full. Heaven has begun to move, but what comes next will test your faith in ways you never imagined. Sometimes God doesn't change your situation because He's using your situation to change you. That's the truth few people are willing to face. You see, when you surrender, it's not just an act of trust, it's an invitation for transformation. Heaven begins the slow, sacred work of rewiring your heart, breaking habits of fear, pride, and control that you didn't even know were ruling your life. And it's here, in this middle ground between surrender and fulfillment, where most people give up because the stillness feels unbearable. You wake up one morning and everything feels ordinary again. The peace that comforted you yesterday seems distant today. You wonder if your moment of surrender even mattered, or if it was just another emotional flicker lost to time. But something deeper whispers within you, keep going, because this is the part of surrender that turns faith into foundation. Faith is not proven by the first yes, it's proven by the yes that stays after the silence returns. It's here that you begin to see God's fingerprints, not in the miracles you prayed for, but in the character He's shaping within you. He's teaching you to trust in His timing, to walk without seeing, to believe without evidence. The Israelites wandered 40 years, not because God was lost, but because they needed to become the kind of people who could handle the promised land once they arrived. You're no different. You're not being delayed. You're being developed. And yet, the process hurts. The waiting exposes your wounds. The pruning feels personal. You find yourself saying, God, I thought surrender would bring peace, not pain. But He's not punishing you, He's purifying you. He's removing everything that can't carry the blessing that's coming. Surrender was never meant to be comfortable. It's meant to be complete. The night grows long, and you sit by your window, watching rain streak down the glass. The world feels heavy, but in the rhythm of the rain, you sense something deeper. Reminder that growth always sounds like surrender before it looks like resurrection. The soil must break before the seed can rise. The heart must yield before the miracle can dwell. You think back to moments when you begged God to speak, not realizing He was already speaking, just not in the language of convenience. His answers were in the delay, in the silence, in the gentle dismantling of your self-reliance. Because God doesn't shout when He's shaping, He whispers. And only surrender can make your spirit quiet enough to hear Him. One night, as you drift between prayer and exhaustion, you have a thought that feels less like your own and more like divine interruption. You've been praying for outcomes, but I've been forming obedience. It stuns you, because you realize that all this time you weren't waiting on God to move. He was waiting on you to stop resisting. And that's when you start to see movement. Not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that rewires your soul. People begin to return to your life, not as they were, but as they were meant to be. Opportunities you thought were lost resurface. Only now you see them with clearer eyes. You find yourself saying no to things you used to chase, because peace has replaced pressure. God is no longer just your rescuer, He's your rhythm. You start to live in alignment with Him, rather than ahead of Him. Every decision now filters through a new awareness. Is this me striving, or is this God leading? The shift is subtle, but undeniable. Your prayers change tone. They're less about pleading and more about partnership. You don't ask for escape, you ask for endurance. You don't demand understanding, you ask for wisdom. And suddenly, you realize that the greatest miracle isn't when God changes your circumstances, it's when He changes you enough to thrive within them. There's a sacred paradox here. The moment you stop forcing outcomes, outcomes start finding you. Because heaven doesn't respond to panic, it responds to peace. When your heart is aligned, what's meant for you can finally locate you. Days pass, and though nothing dramatic happens, you feel different. You no longer wake up searching for signs. You wake up secure in the unseen. You've learned to let the silence speak. You've learned to walk even when the path is dimly lit. You've learned that trust isn't about clarity, it's about proximity. And then one day, without warning, the breakthrough comes. Not through a trumpet blast or a lightning bolt, but through a gentle unfolding. A door opens that you never knocked on. An opportunity appears that you stopped begging for. You stand in awe, realizing this moment isn't random. It's the culmination of surrender. But just as tears fill your eyes, you hear the Holy Spirit whisper, "Don't stop here. This is only the beginning. What I'm about to do next will make sense of every silent night." And in that instant, you understand surrender didn't end with letting go. It began with letting God lead. The air feels lighter. Your heart feels grounded. You know the hardest part is over, but the holiest part is yet to come. Because in chapter 4, the same God who waited in silence will speak in power. There is a moment when everything you've prayed for begins to move, not because you pushed harder, but because you finally stopped trying to control the outcome. It happens quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. One morning, you realize your spirit feels lighter. The fears that used to chase you don't have the same hold anymore. You're not anxiously waiting for God to prove Himself. You're simply walking with Him. The waiting room has turned into a sanctuary. And then, when you least expect it, the shift happens. The phone rings, the message comes. The opportunity appears, and for a brief second, it's not the dramatic, cinematic moment you imagined. It's gentle, it's precise, it's divine. And as you stand there, your eyes fill with tears because you realize something. This isn't the result of your striving. It's the fruit of your surrender. This is what no one tells you. Surrender is not the end of effort. It's the redirection of energy. When you stop wrestling against God's will, you start walking with it. And that's when miracles move naturally, like rivers finding the sea. But this moment, this breakthrough, didn't happen overnight. It was born in the nights you thought God forgot you. It grew in the soil of waiting, watered by tears, rooted in faith that refused to die. You see, surrender isn't just the letting go's, the becoming. The person you are now could only exist because the old version of you was willing to be buried. You look back, and suddenly everything makes sense. The delays, the denials, the detours. Each one wasn't rejection. It was redirection. Every closed door was a divine reroute, saving you from things that looked like blessings, but would have broken you. God's no was not His anger. was his mercy disguised as silence. You think of Joseph in the prison, misunderstood, forgotten by those he helped, yet positioned perfectly for promotion. You think of David, tending sheep, overlooked and underestimated, yet trained in the solitude for the battle that would define him. You think of Jesus in the garden, sweating drops of blood as he whispered, "Not my will, but yours be done." Each moment of surrender was a setup for resurrection, and now, as you stand in the unfolding of what once seemed impossible, you begin to understand the miracle was never about getting what you wanted. It was about becoming someone who could hold what God wanted to give. The tears return not of sadness, but of awe. You realize how tenderly heaven moved all along. Every unanswered prayer was a rerouted blessing. Every delay was divine timing stretching itself into perfection. You whisper softly, "God, I see it now. You never left me, you were leading me." A peace settles over you, not the fleeting kind that depends on circumstance, but the eternal kind that lives in surrender. You're not afraid of the unknown anymore, because you've met the one who commands it. You don't demand answers, because you've fallen in love with the presence that holds them. And that's when God speaks again, in thunder, but in stillness. Now you understand. Surrender was never about losing control. It was about learning who truly holds it. You wanted change. I wanted transformation. You wanted clarity. I wanted closeness. You wanted answers. I wanted your heart. And now I can trust you with what I always had prepared. You fall to your knees, not because you're weak, but because you finally know what strength feels like when it's anchored in divine will. The same God who seemed silent in your suffering is now surrounding you with evidence of his care. Doors open without effort. People return who were meant to stay. New paths emerge that align perfectly with your peace. You don't have to chase any more. What's meant for you comes naturally, because your spirit is finally aligned with heaven's rhythm. And then you realize, surrender never took anything from you. It gave you everything. It gave you peace that can't be stolen, faith that doesn't need proof, hope that doesn't expire. It gave you eyes to see the unseen, ears to hear the whisper beneath the noise, and a heart that beats in time with eternity. The storms will still come, yes, but now you know how to stand in them without fear, because you've learned that surrender isn't about escaping the storm. It's about finding the one who commands it. You walk outside one last time as the sun begins to rise. The light paints everything: gold, the trees, the horizon, even the tears on your face. And in that sacred moment, you understand the mystery that took you a lifetime to learn. Surrender doesn't end the story. It begins the chapter God always wanted to write. And when he moves all at once. He redeems the lost years, restores what was broken, and renews what was buried. What once felt like endings were only entrances to something eternal. You smile through the tears. You don't need to know what comes next, because now you trust the author. The silence was never the absence of God. It was the sound of him writing your resurrection.